Welcome back to the Furious Wild Abridged. In the previous part, we managed to take down the local Chinese faction, and we went on for a second war with Meng Huo. We were able to take out a couple of his regions pretty easily. He then counterattacked with a big stack, but we were able to bring it down in a defensive siege battle. And now we're switching to an offensive siege battle as we move on to attack another of his settlements. This one though had a decent garrison. Turns out to be not much of a siege battle. The map was just a field map. It's possible they did this as a sally battle. They can do that when you attack, but I wasn't paying attention. Anyway, essentially the enemy have a big hill, so we still have something to work against. You can see here the battle begins with a long duel. I sent my guy to duel with an enemy when he offered, and just waited to see what the result would be. Regrettably, we pick up a defeat. I ordered him to retreat just before death. Luckily, he got the enemy so close to death along the way that with that tiny sliver of health left, he routs. So basically, we both lose, we both just run away, and I'm sure both sides are unimpressed by the duel. Now we're going to go for a more substantial plan though. I take our slingers and move them halfway up the enemy's hill. From there they can throw stones up, and obviously the idea is to get the enemy to move forward, wanting to not be standing in range of the slingers. We saw this happen in a previous battle in this campaign. They've left their own slingers behind, so we've successfully drawn them down from their hill. Their commander apparently routed back to his command position, then shattered and ran away properly. Not sure what's going on there, but we don't have to worry about him. And yes, we've got a bunch of melee units to come down from the hill. They did actually try to go back up the hill once they got close. The AI wasn't completely drawn in. Then a couple of units decided to go and outflank me. A couple more were locked in position by me taking Shamoke up to just attack with the elephants. And still the rest of the enemy stuff wasn't paying too much attention, so we just grabbed some free kills. We now have 2 elephants, by the way. As you can see, our third guy, Le Chin, now has one as well. Not quite as good as Shamoke's magical monarchical elephant or something it's called, but still going to do plenty of damage and just disrupts things. Low level infantry don't seem to be able to respond to elephants very well, so just run them over a lot and they tend not to be hitting you because they spend so long lying on the floor. A while later everything does come down and charges our front line, so this is what we wanted, and it goes perfectly. You can see the second they arrive into melee, because I'm also popping the trumpet debuff which massively reduces their morale, they basically just rout on contact and don't want to fight. That's ideal. Meanwhile, the elephants are still marauding around killing things. Our other elephant is taking some of the poison dart attacks. I'm guessing their skin isn't quite thick enough to resist the poison. Doesn't really matter though, because the poison dart guys are just going to get rushed by our front line as it now advances up the hill. We're already at the stage where everything's either routing or skirmishing away, so we just start chasing stuff around. Many of the units that barely took any damage before routing do come back and fight us in a more substantial way. So this is not really to our advantage because we can't easily surround and pound with these isolated fights. However, I think at this stage we do have that technology that gives our units the scare trait. It only triggers in offensive battles, and this is one of them, so the enemy should have reduced morale, plus their army losses are there. They just run once Shamoke shows up with the elephant. Looks like he just kills some of our own men and calls it a victory. Since it's a siege attack, we didn't actually need to chase things down, so that makes it a bit nicer. We've captured one of the enemy's officers, and as mentioned in the last part, we want to recruit 15 officers over the course of the campaign to get the maximum replenishment buff we can get on Shamoke. And that's that really, another territory taken. This expands our income, and I mentioned at the end of the last part, I was particularly interested in having a bit more income so I could get this nice officer into our second army, making that second army much more substantial, plus adding some elephants to that force. We still can't really afford to have it here, but I'm going to disband a unit or two and just try to make some money in the short term to deal with it. At the start of the next turn, we can see that the survivors of the army we beat in the previous part have started moving south. I have the option now to go out with my newly built, slightly more substantial army and challenge them to a field battle. We do have an advantage, not a very big one, and I immediately started thinking, do I have an excuse to not fight this? And really I do, because this army right here is very weak, but in this game, weak units still cost the same amount in upkeep. And it's very far from territory where it can replenish. That means there is some advantage here in ignoring them. Firstly, I can make my army bigger in the meantime. Their army, being damaged, is unlikely to do that much bad to us, and while it's out there, Meng Huo can't recruit another army because he's wasting all his money upkeeping that one. This means I can strike at him with my army here under Shamoke, and potentially just take his faction out without challenging that other army, or at the very least have that other army make me doing damage to him easier. Obviously this isn't a risk-free move, because that army is still strong enough even in its defeated state to do something to us. Like right here we can see it eventually moved to the south to be closer to this other settlement. That settlement's barely defended, so we probably would lose it if they attacked. I can still challenge them with my second army this turn to stop that. But before I went ahead with that, I wanted to see if we could make something of this attack over here. What I was hoping for was that this would be Meng Huo's last territory. We actually know that it's not, because it's not his capital, meaning he has at least one territory that we can't see somewhere. We move on in, and at least for this territory, there's not much to say. They die instantly and we take it. That's going to be handy for our economy. We can start building up that second army to be even more substantial. Annoyingly, on the way in we get another negative random story event. It seems someone's trying to kill Shamoke. If we had certain traits, we had ways of getting out of this, but we just have to take a stab. Shamoke is now wounded. Luckily it's not that bad, he's just wounded for a turn, and because we have to sit here for a turn due to doing an occupy, this doesn't really change anything. Just means if we were attacked right now we wouldn't have him. But no one is close enough to do that. You can see we've now got an army from Lady Zhurong between us and Meng Huo's possibly last remaining territory. So at this stage I started thinking it's going to be easier now to actually peace out the war with Meng Huo. We can't easily attack him, he can attack us with that annoying army remnant. So we're going to try and negotiate our way out of the conflict. I was able to do it by giving him a bunch of food. He had no food basically, so we just did a bit of distribution there. He agrees to a peace deal, and now we can focus ourselves a bit more. We don't have to worry about this army, and that army is now going to have to walk all the way back to the west to get home, wasting Meng Huo's money all the time, so he's going to be weak for a while. In the meantime, we don't need this second army defending the area. We now know that Zhurong's main force is not near the closest part of her territory to our second army, so I felt pretty safe to just rush forwards and try to grab some territory here. This mine is a bit defended, not defended enough for me to bother fighting it. We get a fine auto-resolve really, and we'll move on in. So yes, this will now be our focus, fighting the war with Zhurong, and that's got off to a very good start actually. The more important stuff though is going to be with the main force, which is still near Zhurong's main force. We're 2 turns away from each other despite being quite close by just because of the geography. So for now, all I'll do is move to be on the edge of her border, going to pop an ambush just in case she decides to come around the same route. But what actually happens is she's going to move to the north and just miss me completely. You can also see Meng Huo there, wasting money and time with that army. That's what we like to see. So Zhurong runs off, leaving the nearby territory unguarded, but now putting our second army at greater risk, and this does the same thing. Wu Tu-gu declares war on us. That's the faction to the north of where my second army just captured. So the pressure is on here. We need to make that second army bigger, and we do have some income space to do it, so that's good enough. But yes, advancing any further is going to be a big no-no, because we might be about to face a tide here. By the looks of things, that Wu Tu-gu territory is actually a couple of turns away from us because you can't cross the river very easily. So we're not quite as closed in there as it looks. You can see I'm going to go with my main force to attack the place that Zhurong left behind. The other option would have been to pursue her and try to take her out in a field battle to save the second army, but I was less interested in that, more interested in just swooping in and taking this territory as soon as possible. The Meng Huo territory that would have been to the south of this new location has actually been taken by another faction, Yang Feng, so we don't need to worry about that border much for now. We can focus on going north next turn and then pursuing Zhurong. Need to also make Shamoke the commander of the army again. There we go. As for the second army, as mentioned, we're not going to do very much with these guys. I've got some money, so I can start putting more troops in here. Unfortunately, I had to use an uncompatible commander because we don't have many choices right now. Need to capture more guys and recruit them for that, so that's another reason to do it. As for this Yang Feng situation, I wanted to have good relations with him, and I found I was actually able to join a coalition with him, or start a coalition, and this proved to be a really good idea. So we're now sort of allies, but more than that, I've gained his fealty. It's kind of like I've conquered him basically. I've now got 2 tribes united at the top, so I don't have to fight him anymore, I believe, to complete the objectives associated with this. He's in our coalition, but in some way accepts us as the senior partner. He'll just do what we say. So that's good. We've advanced a tiny bit towards being the actual king of the Nanman overall region. I think at the current time, Meng Huo holds pretty much all of the other fealties, so we need to hunt him down at some point. We see Zhurong moving towards our second army at Zhengyang, but then she disappears. That means we know she's gone into ambush stance. One of the handy advantages the player has over the AI, you can see when they're setting up ambushes. So that's just more reason to not do anything and wait for a potential defense there. Meanwhile, the main force pursues. I was trying to decide whether I should pursue with all of my movement or whether I should stop a little bit short and just hide in the forests here. I ended up going with the hiding choice because while it means we'll be a little bit less close to the action next turn, I don't want Zhurong to turn back. It would be worse for us to fight a field battle with our main force with Zhurong than for her to plough in against the second army, potentially die to the defense or at least be really damaged, and then our healthy first army can come in to just clear things up. And indeed what does happen is she lays siege to the second army, but doesn't attack it, a secret option that kind of makes things a bit difficult for us now, especially because as we see there, Wu Tugu is also bringing a stack towards that same location, and then to make things worse, she goes back into Goddess of Fire mode, and that's going to be a problem. Still, there is some good news coming in. You can see it now says we have tribes united 15. I'm not quite sure how this happened, but it seems that Yang Feng took down Meng Huo, and because I happen to possess his fealty, I guess all the fealties that he got from bringing down Meng Huo go to me. So by being his overlord, all the stuff that he just became overlord of is now placed underneath me, and a lot of the work of this whole tribal unification mission seems to have been done for us. So that's a lucky break, I guess. Now it's pretty much just going to be Zhurong and the tribes to our left, and then we'll have enough to complete this whole thing and be the official king, which I'm sure will come with an assortment of benefits. We also get a whole bunch of benefits for each of the individual fealties I've just picked up. A lot of them are unlocks for new units, which we'll look at in a second, and various passive things like allowing you to have more governors or something like that. Here's the Zhurong siege situation. As we can see, all 3 of the generals are on fire, so it's possible her Goddess of Fire magic is spreading to the other heroes. Plus we've actually taken 0th turn siege attrition. This is an advantage the AI has over the player. When they besiege you, you take attrition immediately before you have a chance to sally. The AI can sally before they take attrition, so that's just something they have that we can't do, unfortunately. In this case, we need Shamoke to push forwards and do something, perhaps cause a distraction, or in some way stop Wu Tugu showing up. We don't have the movement to do that though, so our best hope now is to get out of the war. Unfortunately, to get out of the war, we're going to have to make some big concessions to Zhurong. In particular, I actually give back the territory I most recently conquered. Not that bad, since it was so easy to conquer, we're not really losing too much effort here, but that's going to help us out a lot in this situation, so I think it's worth it. It ends that siege, and means now we're only facing 1 stack in this area. Shamoke can just shuffle forwards and trespass and see how things look next turn, perhaps go over and intervene. I can also now do some recruitment, and here's a look at our new roster. It's gigantic. We've unlocked all sorts of things. I had no idea there were this many Nanman units. Seems like there are more Nanman units than regular units in the game. A lot of them are better versions of other units, like you can get a non-trash spear unit, a good sword unit, things like that. But there are also special units like the poison dart throwers, the fire archers, elephants and tigers. I think in the end here I grabbed a unit of tigers just to try it out. But overall, a pretty decent roster. I hope to see more of these units used in the future to try them out. I'll try and throw some of them into the armies. In the meantime, we see Wu Tugu move towards our territory, then disappear. So now he is doing some kind of ambush plan. We'll just do nothing in response, because doing nothing avoids being ambushed, and it means our second army is getting stronger. Meanwhile, the first army is sneaking around, going through the path towards Wutagu's territory, ready to strike. And Wutagu continues to advance, opening up that territory. What we need now is to take him out in this defensive battle, and it's certainly a good chance because we have this nearly full army defending. And while it looks like I walked off, normally I'd check the garrison to take a look at it, I think it was 6 or 7 units strong, so we have a whole bunch of stuff here. We even have a tiny advantage on the balance bar, and that of course doesn't take into account the all-important towers, so we can certainly use this battle. We begin with 2 duels, just had some duels offered and decided to accept them, wasn't too interested in keeping these officers alive or unwounded, so I thought, well, just go out and see what happens. We've seen before that duels take so long that most likely the battle will be over before these duels are even resolved, so it doesn't really help us. Even if we won, we wouldn't get anything. You can see here one of my officers, he's fighting unarmed against the enemy, quite mean. For now I'm just going to stand still and allow enemy skirmishing units to attack me. It would be fine to actually come out of the town and line up in front of it, the towers would still help us, but it just means they help us a bit more if we force the enemy to fight right underneath them. Plus there's this stamina advantage you get by forcing the enemy to attack with everything against your front unit. When the second unit comes in, it will be relatively stronger because all of the enemy units will have low stamina. Plus, I'm lazy and I didn't want to move, so basically my strategy is to have these big queues of units standing near the towers. The enemy come in their blobs and fight us, and then we just sit there and see what happens. Hard to tell how many enemies the towers are killing, but I think it is quite a lot based on my previous experience in the game and monitoring it before in old versions. We do break through one of our blobs, so I'm able to do some rear attacks on the other ones as a result, and rush stuff forwards to drive the enemy's slingers away. Here Wutagu himself blocks our spearmen and kills a bunch. I'm sure we have that anti-cav advantage against him, but he's probably quite good as a legendary character. Meanwhile, one of my commanders is trying to rout this blob by attacking it, but they're not too interested in routing. Still, they're in trouble fighting beneath the towers and beneath our ranged units. The pressure's about to increase even further because further back in that queue I had my tigers. Tigers work like war dogs in the old Total War Rome 2, where you don't control them, you just click release and they run about on their own doing stuff. Here they're just absolutely mauling everyone in this melee on both sides by the looks of things. Well, they are tigers after all. But after that they seem to run through and start attacking the enemy as they skirmish and rout. So that's perfect. This is going to drive the enemy off the field and tigers can run a bit faster than humans. So this will effectively act as our light cavalry unit to allow us to drive the enemy away without sacrificing our own units to that long run to the edge of the map. We've got another beast solution. Over at the other main fight, I threw in my elephants. These Nanjong elephants are pretty decent. They're not really classified as a melee unit, they're supposed to be a backline support unit. They provide a large buff to everything that's near them, so you can have them just sit behind your front line, drumming away to buff them up. But also, just running forwards into the blob seems to flatten the blob quite well and allow us a breakthrough there. Here you can see the drummers just tapping away. You have like 3 different songs you can drum, which change your buffs that you're getting from it. And one of the buffs you can get is increased speed, making you better at chasing down routing enemies. And that's one of the main problems I'm having, so I like the sound of that. Here you can see we did lose one of our duels, but the enemy guy just gets hit by a bunch of sling stones and poison darts and runs off, so nobody wins in the end. And over here, we actually won a duel. Looks like both sides were unarmed. We beat someone down, and that's the end of that. The battle eventually ends once I'm done chasing things, and the enemy army is in very bad condition, so this is just what we wanted. We get this really nice recruit here, a general who's beautiful, loyal, charismatic, and one-eyed. Could this be the perfect badass queen once we become king? Shamoke, I have to look into that. Perhaps she's married already, but I'm sure we could do something about that if we really tried. As for the aftermath of this battle, I'm going to take the money from it because we don't really need replenishment, and we can go after them in our turn. Before that though is the Zhenyang tribes' turn, and they decide to declare war on me. This is the faction just to the west of Wutagu, so we are going to have to deal with them presently. I had the theoretical option here to call Yang Feng into the war since we're in a coalition, but I also couldn't. I think just because he's going to refuse, it doesn't let me ask, something like that. Anyway, he does actually want me to join one of his wars. He wants me to go back to war with Zhurong. The issue with that is we'd be breaking a treaty, and it's going to be easier for us to actually wait the treaty out, and by the point the 10 turns or whatever it is are over, we will hopefully be done with Wutagu and the new Zhengyang tribes war and be ready to focus just on Zhurong. I think that's going to be the most advantageous path forwards, so we do ignore Yangfeng as a result. Shamoke will now move forwards into Wutagu's territory. We can't strike right now, which is inconvenient, but we can get pretty close. I'm actually not going to go all the way because since we can't make it this turn, we might as well wait until next turn to actually cross over the border, since we will lose all of our movement points anyway once we get there if we occupy it. Therefore we might as well just be in ambush stance and get a tiny bit of replenishment there as well. Being in ambush stance just bamboozles the AI. It might make them do something stupid like move the few troops they have there somewhere else or something like that. So that's just my preference. Anyway, now we go for a follow-up battle against the Wutagu main force and take it down pretty handily. With this, we're going to be free to make our advance, not only with the first army, but with the second army. It doesn't need to be here anymore, so it can just follow behind for support, and we may need it if the Zhengyang tribes also get involved with this at the same time. We also there had an event that killed off Wutagu or wounded him, so I guess that means he can't respawn with his army anytime soon. Shamoke moves forward and lays siege to the enemy territory, but there's enough stuff here to get an even balance bar, plus they'll have some towers of their own if I went in for an attack. I would rather wait for the second army to arrive and then fight, but you can see the Zhengyang tribes actually have brought an army over. Seeing that, we need to potentially defend against them. What I wanted to do was set an ambush here just inside our territory. This failed because I moved too far. So instead I shuffled forwards. There's a river crossing there which you can just about see, so we can stand on that crossing. The risk though is that the Zhengyang tribes will just rear attack Shamoke's force. I did some diplomacy here with Wu off to our east. One of our missions was to get military access with them. I also completed a mission to get a bunch of trade money. As you can see, I think I'm trading with Shi Shi, who is one of the factions to the south somewhere. Doesn't really matter, but the Wu thing turns out to be important. There's some kind of quest chain revolving around being nice to Wu. And I think that's a really good idea because they're going to be the superpower next door to us. So let's try and be nice to them at least until we've done focusing on the western campaigns. As you can see, Wutagu tried to get peace, I rejected him, and then he sallies here, and crucially this is before the Zhengyang tribes have moved, so perfect really. We have a chance to fight this battle without any towers, giving the enemy an advantage, and if we can take them down, we'll then be in a position to defend against the Zhengyang tribes, both at that river crossing and inside the settlement. So we'll start the next part with this battle and take it from there.